So, Cass and I thought it would be fun to have a conversation about a very intriguing recent piece of his that he wrote. We know a lot of people prefer to get their information from videos these days than reading. So, Cass, welcome. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about this great piece of yours called The Morality of Legality. And I wanted to start off by asking you to just describe the basic idea and ask why you think people haven't really noticed this idea before.
Okay, so the basic idea is that in government for sure, and sometimes in other domains, compliance with the law is associated with a moral commitment. The idea in government is that if you're planning to do something, maybe the president wants to do it, maybe the secretary of defense wants to do it, it had better be consistent with the law. And the idea isn't a matter of strategy or politics or pragmatism. It's there's a moral commitment to legality. And the idea is that that's different from the rule of law, or at least it's not coextensive with it. So you might think, I'm a judge, I'm going to follow the law. And that has certain moral commitments in it. Maybe the law has to be prospective rather than retroactive. Maybe it has to be clear in general. The morality of legality is simpler, which says that government officials, for sure, have to comply with the law as a moral matter. And the reason it's not all around us, I think, is when we think of people in government, we think that they had better follow the law. They might get in trouble if they don't. President's immune, but not everyone's immune. Might think that if they act inconsistently with the law, what they do will be futile. That is, will be struck down. But I've worked in government on a few stints, and I know that sometimes public officials might be tempted to think, well, we might lose in court, but it's worth it. There will be some benefit, political otherwise, for doing it. And if the morality of law is in place, people will face what is kind of a moral taboo, that even if you can benefit some people and even if the politics are great, shouldn't do it because it's inconsistent with the morality of legality.
So, one of the things that the piece explores is the various sort of contexts in which this issue might come up, which I think actually helps explain why it's a complicated idea. So, um, how much can public officials challenge, let's say, existing legal understandings and still be acting consistently with what you call the morality of the law, of legality?
Okay, so there's a term in government, which I've heard a lot. There's a term in government, which is litigation risk. And the basic idea is that you can run a risk if you do something. Maybe it's 10% chance you'll lose. Maybe it's a little higher. Maybe you can put a percentage on it. To run a litigation risk is fine, so long as the risk isn't, over 50%, it's certainly fine. And one reason you might run a litigation risk is you might be trying to move the law a bit. So you might think the law is kind of in the wrong place with respect to affirmative action or abortion or immigration, and you want to move it. And so long as it's not defying law or making an argument which is doomed to lose, it's consistent with the morality of legality to run that risk.
So, say more about this sort of doomed to lose, I guess, idea. The way you put it in the piece is that you say, suppose the executive branch knows it's unlikely to be successful, but it thinks in good faith and as a matter of principle that it ought to be able to succeed. So that's consistent, in your view, with the morality of following the law, right?
Completely. So suppose you have some innovation with respect to immigration. It might be something the left likes, it might be something the right likes. And you think, as the law stands, it's greater than 50% likely that you're going to lose, but you think your argument is right. And you know your argument is reasonable. You aren't acting inconsistently with the morality of legality. You're treating like legality seriously. You're running a risk of losing. Maybe you think the judges are kind of bullheaded, or maybe you think they're ideological, but it's consistent with the morality of legality to give it a try. That doesn't mean that the morality of legality is toothless. There are a ton of things that any administration would want to do that are just blocked by law, and you don't have a good faith argument for defending them. And in those cases, the fact that you'd like to be able to give it a try, you could produce a brief, that's not enough.
So, can you give an example of something controversial, let's say the current administration has done through an executive order, something you might disagree with as a matter of the right answer legally, but that would still be consistent with your view about the moral obligations of government officials, not like the executive order on law firms that you mentioned, but something else as a concrete example?
Yeah, some of the immigration reforms, let's call them, which are changing some of the things the prior administration did. Uh, they might involve taking parole in place away. They might involve other efforts to step up deportation of people who are here unlawfully. Some of those are very vulnerable legally, and some of them have lost in court. There's kind of technical issues about how and on what grounds you can change the judgment of a prior administration. But in general, at least, a lawyer can say with respect to those, I can defend those. And a public official might say, I've studied the legal issues and I think we ought to win.
hmm And so it seems like a lot here turns on the good faith belief of the relevant government officials that they have a plausible legal position, even if it's inconsistent with existing precedent, even if they think the courts are likely to rule against them. They're not acting inconsistent with their obligations, in your view, if I understand you correctly, if they have a good faith belief that there's a reasonable legal basis for the position. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And I want to be kind of what's the right word? Naive, idealistic, firm. I think firm is my favorite of the three words. That anyone through introspection can separate their hopes from their beliefs. So you might hope that some reform, let's say it's left of center or right of center, is lawful. But you look at it objectively and you think, I can't in good faith defend that. Any lawyer has had that experience, which means that there's scope for, let's say, a Biden administration or a Trump administration to go forward with lots of stuff that might lose in court. But still, there's also scope for lawyers within either administration to say, boss, there's no good faith legal argument, even though there's a deeply held moral conviction.
And in our incredibly polarized political culture, where everything has become so tribalistic and so confrontational, do you have any sense of how much public officials actually continue to think this way? I'm sure you thought this way when you were in government, but how hard is it, I guess, do you imagine, for people in this environment to hold on to this morality of legality idea when they're lawyers in the government?
Most of the time, it's not that hard. So I saw in the Obama administration, time and again, a policy preference which didn't get carried through because of a judgment from the lawyers and the public officials who were often lawyers too, that there's no good faith legal argument in its defense. It's great, but you can't do it. And that happened under the Biden administration also, where there were a bunch of initiatives that just got blocked because you couldn't defend them on legal grounds. I'm not working, needless to say, in the Trump administration. But I'm hopeful that although it's been very adventurous, the Trump administration, and run a lot of legal risks, and in some cases, in my view, the morality of legality has not been enjoying its finest hour. Still, there are a bunch of cases, I'm confident, where the legality of the initiative is so clearly not present that they haven't gone forward.
It's clear without any question that they're certainly, pushing the bounds of executive power very, very far, and I think they realize that they're pushing the envelope very aggressively. But it is interesting in the recent case involving nationwide injunctions that the Solicitor General did say to the Supreme Court, we will follow the decisions of the Supreme Court. We'll treat them as kind of binding precedent once we get to that stage. And the court made quite a lot of that in the decision in the universal injunction case recently.
Right, that's great. And for any president and any Department of Justice to say that we'll follow an authoritative court ruling, that's kind of ought to go without saying. The fact that it's a kind of a hallelujah moment is a little concerning. Nonetheless, it is a hallelujah moment. I think what we should add to that is that if internal to the federal government is a sense that if this isn't in good faith defensible as lawful and believed by legally informed people within the government to be lawful, we shouldn't even go forward with it. And that's super important, because if you go forward with something that is inconsistent with legality, let's say, the process might be the punishment for the relevant people. It might be that you ruin their month or their year or worse. And it might be a company, it might be a law firm, it might be an individual. And that shouldn't happen, even if ultimately the court will rule in the person's favor, and even if ultimately the government will obey the court order. The morality of legality stops illegality in its tracks rather than right before the train hits the innocent victim.
Well, that's a very powerful way of putting what's so significant about your effort to try to communicate this idea, to convey this idea, to help people in government internalize this idea, or at least think about it all the time. So that's part of why I found the piece so intriguing. And thanks very much for taking a little bit of time to discuss it. And hopefully more people will come to understand the importance of the morality of legality.
Thank you. I'm grateful to you.
Okay, thanks, Cass.